guys, it's Leslie and welcome back to this channel. I'm going to try to be pretty brief because this is a January wrap-up and I read a lot of books this month, like 22. Now I know that sounds like a lot, but most of those were fairly short and I listened to a ton of audiobooks. So without a lot of jibber jabber, let's just jump right in. The first 7 books that I got to were all audiobooks, and they were the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. I'd never read all of these as a kid, so I wanted to just say I've read the whole series just so I would, know what it's all about. And I really liked this. I think it's a little hard to judge these books as far as a rating. I mean, I gave them all 5 stars just because it's nostalgic and the world building is great, but it's, they're pretty short and they just have a lot of wisdom and great character development in a very short amount of time. And because it's written for kids, I feel like you can't be too hard on it, but I really liked it. There were definitely a few parts that I teared up just because it's so sweet. One of the biggest things that I enjoy in a book is grace or mercy. I love that being shown, especially in the times where it's not deserved, and that's all throughout of the Chronicles of Narnia. So I love that and I enjoy it. So if you've never read it, it's totally worth the audiobook listen. It's great. The next book I also listened to on audiobook, and that was called Parachute Infantry by David Kenyon Webster. This is a memoir of Webster's time in the military during World War II. He is another one of the characters featured in Band of Brothers, kind of towards the end. He's sort of the main character and titled The Patrol. It's pretty much from his point of view. And I liked this. This is a little more, I would say, grittier than some of the other memoirs that I read from the Band of Brothers people last year. It's much more, I would say, negative maybe of the war and of the military in general, which was kind of refreshing. It was nice to see someone be angry about what they saw, especially the military hierarchy, the way that privates are treated versus officers. It was good. But if you're into World War II memoir or you like Band of Brothers, this is another one you should check out. Next, I read The Bear and the Nightingale, and I read this for a read-along that Krista from Books and Jams does on Goodreads, and it's one I had wanted to read for a while, and I just didn't get to it in December, so I decided, hey, I'll read it in January. And I had a lot of issues with this book. I really wanted to love it. I just enjoy a lot of aspects of Russia and Russian people, so I really thought that I would love this book. It's basically a semi-fantastical story of this girl Vasya and her family, and it's a major clash of the old and the new. So new religion being Christianity and the old religion being that of folk tales and that sort of thing. And I don't know, I had a lot of problems with this. Overall, the story and using the idea of the old and the new coming together, I liked that, but I didn't love the characters. I thought a lot of it was super derivative. I feel like when you make the bad guy this sort of stereotypical bad guy, I don't know, it just bothers me. I just thought that it wasn't as strong as it should have been. I liked one character a lot. For a story that the majority of people, when they have read it, come out and say, wow, the main girl, Vasya, is such a strong character. I was just waiting for her to be this strong character and it never showed up. Maybe in the very end, but I just never saw it. It was not written where she was a strong character, and in my opinion, in any way. Most of what she did, she ended up having to do because she had no choice, and that to me is not the same thing as strength. I think that's survival. So I don't know, maybe I'm just being too picky, but no, I really did not. The more I think about it, the less I liked it. So I think I gave it 3 stars, and I think that's probably pretty generous. I am curious to where the trilogy goes, but not enough to really sit and read it. Sorry. I also listened to on audiobook Seraphina. This is a YA sort of dragon story. It's a fantasy as well. And I like this one okay. I feel like it's pretty middle of the road. I enjoyed some of the aspects, like the dragon system. I don't know if that's not really what it's called, but the way dragons are portrayed and the way that I thought that was interesting. And I think there's a lot to tell about actually race in that story. I think it's a good parallel to maybe certain things that we experience in our own culture. So I enjoyed that. I liked that there's a heavy musical aspect. I thought that was really cool and pretty new for books that I had read. But it kind of dragged on, and I don't know. It wasn't like the most amazing thing, but I feel like I probably gave this 3 stars as well, and it was pretty good. The next book I got to was American Fire by Monica Hesse. This is like a true crime story about a arson spree that happened in, I want to say it was Virginia, somewhere in the eastern part of the United States, eastern southern part. And this was really good. I liked this a lot. I think there were parts of it that were just meh, and I don't think that some of the characters, the people, I don't think their backstories were done as much as I would have liked. You know, when you're talking about true crime, a lot of, at least my interest, is like the motivation and also the background of the people who commit certain crimes, because to me, if you don't understand maybe how these people were brought up or something, you don't quite understand why they would go and do what they did. And so I thought that was a little bit lacking, but overall I thought it was good. It's not super long, and just the thought of, I think like 78 or even more fires were set in a certain period of time that were just devastating this community, and it's really good. I think that's worth, if you're into true crime, it's one to look at. I also listened to A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. This is the story of his attempt to walk the Appalachian Trail. He ends up going with a friend, and it's kind of just who they meet and their adventures. I like this though. I thought that it was funny. It's fun. If you like memoir and you're interested in like nature or hiking or any of that, you might like this one too. The next audiobook I listened to was H is for Hawk by Helen McDonald. And this is another memoir, but it's focused on how she dealt with grief from the loss of her father. It's also about how she decides to get a goshawk and train it, so a giant bird of prey. I have had this on my TBR for really a long time. I remember it being like reviewed in Entertainment Weekly. It was reviewed really favorably. And so finally I was like, I'm just gonna listen to it. I'm in the mood for something maybe a little bit darker and deeper. And I was kind of disappointed in this. I just don't think that the way that the memoir was written was its best way. I don't know, that doesn't sound right, but she takes this other man in the 50s who also had written a book about training a goshawk, and she uses a ton of his own work. So basically it ended up feeling like a biography of this man alongside her own experiences. And it just didn't work for me. Those parts were really boring, and I just really didn't care. And honestly, I didn't see how it really paralleled what she was doing. She herself is like an experienced bird person. Like, she is a professor, I think at Oxford or Cambridge, talking about birds of prey. So it's not like she was like someone who had no idea. I mean, she had never raised one from herself, but she had been around them and she had studied them. That part wasn't good, and anytime those sections came up, it really took me out of her story. There was one part in particular that I definitely like cried listening to, and it was one of the parts with her grief with her father, and I think they were going to see his body, and in the car, and even like saying this now could like really make me tear up because it's so visceral. Like, you can feel this, that she just starts like saying her dad's name. Oh my gosh, I'm actually crying. Like, just like calling out to him like in the car because it was just so unreal that he was gone. So like, you know, if you're looking for someone, you say their name, and seriously, that part like killed me, and I wish there was so much more of that in this book, but unfortunately it was not. There's the parts that she's training her own hawk named Mabel is good because there is a lot of allusions to how she deals with like escapism with putting all of her energy into the hawk, but oh, I just wish that other biography part was not in there because that just wasn't good. And I don't really recommend this to other people unless you're super interested in hawks, because I don't feel like that the real human connection part is good other than the part that I just told you, which, I mean, I guess that's a spoiler, but oh well. About midway through the month, I kind of got into wanting to prepare myself to do the Book Rides Read Harder challenge. I made a video about it if you're interested in it. So then I kind of got like tunnel vision about trying to pick out the books that I wanted to read for it, and then I just kind of went at it. So I read a bunch of the books for that challenge. Most of them I picked were really short because, you know, when you read something out of your comfort zone, sometimes you don't want to like dedicate a lot of time or energy to it. I read Binti, and this was for a challenge about set in outer space, written by a person of color. And I thought this was okay. It's basically a novella, so it's really short, but the story and the world is cool. Like, I feel like this is a great start to something, but it is so fast and things just happen, like major things happen, that it was hard to just really truly connect. I did hear from some other people and reading some other reviews that the rest of the series is really, really good. So I may pick up books 2 and 3 in the future. But as for the first one, I thought it was okay. Like better than, not great, but I guess good. I also read my first manga this year, or ever, I guess, and that was called Again, and I got this recommendation from Matthew Sharapa, and I actually really like this. So I don't read a lot of graphic novels or like comics or that stuff. I've never really connected with it, but this story was pretty cool. I thought this was cute. I enjoyed it, and I really actually liked the drawing aspect of it more than some of the graphic novels that I've read, so I like that. I don't think I'm as scared to read more manga in the future. After that, I made the biggest mistake of my life reading or listening to a book called Fanny Hill. I made a whole review about that if you're interested. Basically, this was 1700s erotica, and yep, it was a lot. Moving on. The next book that I read, also an audiobook for the alternate history. I came across this on another list. I need to stop trusting these lists that just are on like the internet somewhere, because I don't know. They're not leading me in the best directions. But I listened to a book called River of Teeth by Sarah Gailey. This is about a period of time that I really didn't know about, but I guess at one point, the U.S. government was going to bring in hippos to the Louisiana Bayou to kind of alleviate the need for so many cows, or like because of a meat shortage. So I guess we were going to use hippos. I don't know. I think that's hilarious. And so I was like, okay, cool. Like, this could be a really interesting story. And I gave that one, like, I think maybe 2 stars, 3 stars maybe. I think it is part of a series maybe, but I have no interest in reading on. But that was kind of a bummer. The next book I listened to was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. And this is a YA story told in verse. I feel like this book is going to be extremely popular. I'm sure it's already gotten a ton of hyped reviews. I haven't seen any yet, but I can see why people would love this story. It is good, and I listened to the audiobook, so the actual author reads the poems, I guess, and she is like a spoken word poet. Like, that's what she has her background in, so like the way she can deliver it is really amazing, and so I definitely recommend the audiobook version of it. I thought towards the middle end that the story got a little something for me. I don't know what the word is. Like, I mean, what I put on Goodreads is it felt a little bit like Sister Act 2, if you know that movie, which I love that movie. It's not really a dig. It just felt like I'd already seen this sort of plot line before, where the main girl and the mom clash over their opinions on something, and you know, you can figure it out from there. I did love a lot of the questions it kind of went through, and I liked the representation of a teenager and sort of their things that they battle, like with their own sexuality and their, you know, obeying or disobeying their parents but following their heart. So I really liked it. I think this is going to be huge. It's going to blow up if it already hasn't, but I think this is one worth checking out. I still gave it 4 stars, but I think other people will really like it. The next book I actually read, I read this as a physical book, called Moving the Palace by Charif Majdalani. I think that's right. I read this. This is the challenge of read a book that has less than 100 reviews on Goodreads. So I just kind of looked at, again, a list of books that were super underhyped that people hadn't known about, but that were really good. And I just kept looking until I found one that didn't have very many reviews, and I found this one. I'm not even really going to attempt to explain what this book is about. I think if you read the synopsis on Goodreads, you will, you know, it'll give you a better idea. And this is also translated. It was written in French. I did like this story because there was something about it that made me want to keep reading it, but I will tell you what, I am not smart enough for this book. I feel like that is probably going to be the biggest complaint for any regular reader who reads it, because it's not very long. I think it was less than 200 pages, but it kind of reads like the Odyssey, where this kid is going with this, he's moving a palace, he gets a palace, and he's like moving it across the desert to take it back home. I mean, it's more involved with that. That's like a very, very bare bones description, and it just is so, like, some of the paragraphs are like pages long, just like a singular paragraph. Some of the sentences have about 55 commas in it. So I just don't know if I'm smart enough to have really grasped this story enough. I bet this would be an amazing book to study in either like a French literature class, but I just think it was probably over my head, so I can't really give it a great review. I liked the characters, and the setting was awesome because it's going through like Sudan and Ethiopia, and they talk about just the different kinds of people they meet and the different clans, and I need somebody smarter than me who can read it and tell me that what I missed, because there's something about it that I think is very interesting, but for me it just was like an okay read because I don't think I understood most of it. After that, I had the audiobook Tangerine by Christine Mangan. I haven't listened to a thriller or read a thriller in quite a while, and although I don't know this fits directly in the thriller category, I would say that's probably the genre it's closest to, and I like this one okay. As far as like the thriller part of the story, and as far as the root cause of the tension, I don't know, it just is overdone and not super interesting. But the descriptions of Tangiers, which is where this takes place in Morocco, is awesome. Like, you feel like you are there, like you feel the crowded streets, you feel the heat, you feel the smells of the food in the marketplace and all of that stuff. And it's like 1950s-esque, so you can kind of even feel that time period. So that part is awesome. I really think that's worth listening. The overall thriller part of it and like the characters, like some of it is just like you roll your eyes at it because at the end you're just like, really? Okay. Like, you know, that's fine. But definitely if you're interested in like atmosphere for a story, this is the book for you. If you really get sucked into your thrillers and need a really good payoff, I'd say this one's probably not the best choice. After that, I read the book, actual physical book. I did read it, Down the Rabbit Hole by Juan Pablo Villalobos, I think is the author's name. I read this for the own voices of that takes place in Central America or Mexico, and this takes place in Mexico. translated from the Spanish. And I thought this was awesome. This, like, I gave this 5 stars. I loved it. It's slightly disturbing. It is about a little boy. He's the main protagonist, and his dad is like a drug cartel boss. And he is just kind of telling about his life from his point of view. So he doesn't really understand that his dad is basically a terrible person. But he is also obsessed with getting a pygmy hippopotamus. So I don't know what this month was about with hippos, but I guess that's the thing. So I don't know, the language and the repetition, there's just so much about this that I thought was brilliant. Just even like the opening chapter, it's like the kid is fairly precocious, I would say. So he's like saying, I'm smart and I know these words, and he references those words throughout the rest of the story, which I thought was super genius to me. I loved it. The biggest negative about this book is that the kid uses a specific word multiple times to like denote like cowardice or being not a man, and it's basically a homophobic slur, and that part was super bothersome. I don't know if there's another reason why that word was used. Maybe there's something even more cultural that I don't understand, or the translation, or if it was meant to make you uncomfortable because this small child is using a word that maybe he doesn't quite understand once he previously talked about reading the dictionary and knowing a lot of stuff about specific words. I don't know, but that part was uncomfortable, and that word is used multiple times. I'm sure you can figure out what it is. So if that is bothersome, don't pick this up. But just the way, other than that, the story is told, I don't know. I really, really thought this was just, it was just a really smart book. And I found that nice. After a lot of duds, I enjoyed this. And the last book I finished in the month of January was Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. I actually read this all, didn't listen to it on an audiobook, which, you know, this is almost a 1,000-page book. And I liked it. I really did. I don't think it's as, like, obsessively good as some people have said it is. I agree that it's definitely a page turner, and you can definitely be engrossed in the characters and you want to know what happens, but there are parts that drag. There's a lot of technical terms. I mean, if you don't know anything about this story, it's basically Middle Ages setting of like 1100s England, where they are building a cathedral. Now that sounds kind of boring in and of itself, but the characters involved, so like the priests who like oversee it or where it's being built, the builder, the builder's family, the other like high up people, so like kings and bishops and all these other people that have power at the time. It's compelling for sure, but there is a lot of technical talk about, like, I mean, maybe not a ton, but a good chunk of like how the cathedral is being built, like the literal architecture of it, like the science and the math, and that part got a little boring, and honestly I didn't care about the technical specs of building a cathedral. There are parts of that are interesting, but it didn't need to happen multiple times. There is one character in this who is the scum of the earth, the worst, and I'm not a huge fan of doing the whole trigger warning thing, but I will let you know that there is major rape in this book, and it is dramatic and it is scary. I would have to like put the book down and like take a break, because it was, I guess, it's just graphic and it's pretty brutal, and so if that is something you don't want to see or read about, don't read this book, because there's multiple instances of it. Some of the scenes are worse than others, but still it's apparent and it's very uncomfortable. But overall, I gave this 4 stars. I'm not sure if I will like pick up another one of these books by Ken Follett, because all of, at least his recent sort of published books are so long. So I think I'm probably going to have to wait a while on those. That was my super long January. Hope you had a good week, and I'll see you next time. Bye.